J.D. Vance, the Peacemaker. Welcome to Columbus on the Record. I'm Mike Thompson. The Iran war has been a difficult balance for Ohio's J.D. Vance. For years, the commentator turned U.S. Senator, now Vice President, has railed against foreign and forever wars. But as Vice President, he's had to defend Donald Trump's numerous foreign military actions, including the war in Iran. This week, the New York Times reports Vance was a lone voice of skepticism in White House meetings leading up to the attack on Iran in February. Now he plays the role of peacemaker, heading to Pakistan to participate in negotiations to make the two-week ceasefire permanent. Politically, it provides him and the Trump administration with the chance to declare victory and avoid that long war. Mark Weaver, putting aside the fact that ending a war and having peace is a good thing, this is a tough situation for J.D. Vance. It provides him with a tremendous opportunity to make this war go away permanently, but it's also perilous, right?
Yeah. I mean, some of the president's furthest left critics like to call him a king. They have these little rallies called No King rallies. A king wouldn't take a skeptic from his court and send him over as his person to go talk to the enemy during a war. So Donald Trump really does welcome different viewpoints. The reporting we have about this White House suggests that Marco Rubio and J.D. Vance maybe have a different view on some of these things. George Washington famously had some interplay between Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson and his cabinet, made famous in a Broadway play. So having two different voices and listening to both of them could be a good thing for a president.
But if you disagree with Donald Trump, though, it can be perilous, right? Publicly?
Well, he certainly speaks his mind. What's interesting about Donald Trump, he says things that are just kind of rude publicly. And as someone who's probably talked to more politicians than anybody here, let me tell you, they all speak that way privately. Yeah. And so what's different is he's just unwilling to put the mask on and say, I'll be nice in public and I'll be rude in private.
Well, it's a matter of fact, it's become his persona to do that sort of a thing. So I think I agree with you 100% that it's a totally new thing to hear someone who's supposed to be representing us acting in public like you're supposed to be acting in private. Now, another thing that I thought was interesting in the New York Times article written by Maggie Haberman is that the reason for Vance and Rubio disagreement with the president were actually different. I think that Vance didn't want the risk, and we're seeing the outcomes of that risk right now. We don't even have to speculate on it. And then that Rubio said, look, if you have a limited goal in launching military strikes, but as far as regime change, ain't going to work. And I think that we're seeing that. It remains to be seen, but I would hedge my bet that it's not going to work.
I mean, you always wonder how these stories come out. Who was the source of the New York Times story that showed that Vance was saying one thing in the meeting, Rubio was saying another? Joe, it just shows these are the two leading contenders to succeed Donald Trump, and they're both trying to, manage the coverage during this crisis to help benefit them down the road.
Well, and right now we're going into the political season, the midterms, that could really change things. And you've got a war that is unpopular. You've got, gas prices that are increasing. You've got affordability problems on many different levels. This is something that could make a difference in November. And I think that all of the politicians on all sides of the aisle are looking at this and saying, whoa, what gives?
To your point, Mark, that you maintain that Donald Trump trusts J.D. Vance to lead negotiations there. If he comes back without the Strait of Hormuz being open, can Donald Trump blame J.D. Vance, and might that hurt him down the road?
I'd be surprised he would do that. He's been very complimentary to both Marco Rubio and J.D. Vance, both of whom were Donald Trump critics years ago. So he's willing to have different views in. I think it's important to talk about, when we talk about regime change, we're not quite sure who the regime is in Iran. One thing we can agree has been a success is their ability to wage war and terrorism, both in the region and worldwide, has been significantly hampered. And had there been a major terrorist attack in America or somewhere else, a lot of talk on shows like this would have been, why didn't we do something to stop this before the terrorist attack happened?
Well, and that's the problem. Once again, I agree with Mark. The only thing is that military excursion was launched on the speculation that you just cited, the possibility that something might happen, whether it be here in the United States or, let's face it, more than likely was going to be Israel, because that had been the mortal enemy of Iran during the past, 45 years, I guess, of the administration.
Yeah, I mean, the inflation on Friday rose to 3.3%. You mentioned gas prices, Joe. They're around $4 a gallon.
$4 a gallon.
$4.19.
The war is, when you think about wars and how long they can last, this is we're barely into this one. We're what, 6 or 8 weeks into this one.
Yeah, and you know, what is being said doesn't necessarily match what the reality is. You know, right now we're being told that this is, you know, under control, 2 weeks. It's, you know, we're going to be out of there. It's not going to be a long-term commitment. But we've heard that before. We've heard that from other presidents before. And I think a lot of the people who voted for Donald Trump, they were saying back then that one of the reasons that they voted for him was they wanted America first, they wanted out of forever wars. And now this has come along, and it might really hurt him.
It's sort of percentage-wise, he still has his hardcore base of about 22 to 33%. Whatever it is that he does, they're fine with it. I think it's going to take a long, long time, Mussolini-like, if you want to look back in history, for something different to happen.
Okay. Ohio primary voting is underway with neither major party candidate for governor facing a serious intra-party challenge. Amy Acton and Vivek Ramaswamy are laying out policy positions for the November election. In a new TV ad, the Republican Ramaswamy promises to roll back property taxes to levels before the end of the pandemic. The ad does not say how he would make up for the lost revenue. Democrat Amy Acton has presented her affordability plan, which, among other things, calls for tax credits for children and low-income families, medical debt forgiveness, and restoring energy efficiency standards. Acton does not provide details on how she would pay for elements of her program. Joe Ingles, we've been waiting for these candidates to engage, to start talking policy, to make promises, and it's happening.
Well, sort of. Yeah, it's happening. They're throwing out some ideas of what they want to do, but we still have a whole lot of questions because we don't have the details. And the thing is that, you know, if you, with Ramaswamy, you take those taxes off the table, then where does the money come to make things whole? You've got a lot of entities, schools, and local governments that are really sitting there watching that. You've got, you know, ordinary people who are sitting there saying, well, how is that policy going to help me? Then on, you know, when you talk about Amy Acton's policies, there's a lot of policies there that could cost a lot of money. We don't know the exact price point at this point, but it could cost a lot of money. And the question is, where does that come from? Because we don't know how you can do that. And remember, Ohio has to have a balanced budget.
Making promises without detailing how you're going to pay for them, that's very unique. But anyway, getting to the property tax proposal by Vivek Ramaswamy. It's hard to tell what he means by bring it back to levels before the end of the pandemic. Now, the World Health Organization says the pandemic ended in May of 23. So that's less aggressive than his original proposal, which was to eliminate property taxes. So to bring it back 3 years ago, I mean, that's something that could possibly be done. It'd be painful, but it could be done, right, Joe?
Oh, absolutely. As a matter of fact, I think that Acton's plan can also come about. The problem is that nobody wants to say that taxes need to be raised and where those taxes are going to be raised. I do believe that it's an albatross around the necks of Ohioans to have property taxes at the level that they are. I'd like to see them reduced by half. But being a tax and spend Democrat, I would like to see income taxes graduated, also increased probably by about 50%. And that's something that neither Ramaswamy nor Acton, of course, I'm not running for anything, so I can say whatever I want, that they would want to say.
To fix the property tax problem, if you consider it to be a problem, and it's raised, they've gone up very sharply in the past few years, you have to have something drastic, don't you, Mark? Something bold, like say we're going to roll it back 3 years.
Yeah, politics requires boldness, and then lawmaking requires nuance. So probably the greatest economist of the modern era, Thomas Sowell, famously said that when it comes to public policy, there are no solutions, there are only trade-offs. So if you're going to do this, you're going to have to do that. So if we're going to cut property taxes, obviously the money has to come from somewhere. But I imagine, Vivek, the first thing they'll say is, let's get some reductions in spending, particularly spending we don't need, before we look at raising other taxes.
So could something like that force the consolidation of local governments, which a lot of people feel that the state needs, the consolidation of townships, the consolidation of school districts?
Public universities. Vivek actually talked about that. There are some public universities, Youngstown State University is one of them, that is doing a lot with a little. And there are others who probably could be, some of their programs could be merged in with other schools so we don't have to have the same programs at all public universities. There's a lot of ideas. DOGE at the federal level showed us there's ways to find genuine waste. What's happening in Minnesota and California with the waste in some of these social spending programs should be looked at here in Ohio.
Joe, to Amy Acton's proposals, tax credits for children and low-income families, and it's complicated how it works. And she is criticized for trying to do what Mamdani did in New York. But his affordability program was, we're going to freeze rent, we're going to have free buses, free child care, and we're going to tax the rich in corporations. Hers takes explanation. His didn't. Is hers going to work as well as his did?
I don't know if it'll work or not. It certainly needs to be worked on. That's the reason that the first words out of my mouth in this segment was that Bernie Sanders tried to do the same thing. And he never explained. He just said, oh, you know, if we can afford this, then we can afford that. No, if we're affording this, is the opposite, is that we can't afford that. So I do think, like Mark was saying, the money has got to come from somebody. And if the only way to redistribute wealth is through government, is through taxation, then that's the only way. And I'm sorry about that, but I don't know any other country that has done it.
Joe is an honest Democrat. He is speaking the truth. Now,
there are many of us.
But he can never run again, having said those things, because those are hard truths. Mamdani now has had to dial back some of these promises. What a shock.
Yeah.
He promised the world, and he can't deliver more than a couple of feet of progress for what he said.
It's been 100 days, so you've got to give him a couple more days.
Nonetheless, he still is saying that free buses are a long way off, and the notion of government-subsidized grocery stores is going to be ridiculous.
So, Joe, to Amy Acton's style, do we expect her to be able to make affordability proposals more relatable to the average Ohioan and not have to explain how the non-refundable tax credit works and income taxes and things like that?
I think she will try to do that. We saw her do that with COVID. You know, she tried to make COVID something that people could really understand.
The cheese thing worked very well.
Yeah, she had all kinds of analogies and demonstrations. But, you know, I think she'll try to do that. But I think the thing that we're all basically saying is that somehow she's going to have to figure out how she can pay for that. And when I have talked to her, when we've talked to her and asked questions, it's been, oh, it's a matter of priorities. Our priorities are in the wrong place, but my priorities are better so. And then she also talks about public-private cooperation and how that could help with some of these things. So I don't know. I guess we'll have to see more.
Yeah.
Devil in details.
Well, both candidates agree that property taxes are a problem.
Yes, I think most Ohioans probably
Most
agree
Ohioans
that.
agree.
We'll have to write that check or see that escrow account anyway. The National Republicans are looking to help Senator John Husted keep his seat, which could be key to keeping the Senate in Republican control in Washington. The Senate Republicans campaign organization promises to spend nearly $80 million on Husted's behalf. That would be the most the group will spend on any U.S. Senate campaign this cycle. The conservative group Americans for Prosperity has launched a new ad for Husted. On the other side, Sherrod Brown announced this week his campaign has raised $12 million in the first 3 months of this year. The campaign has been outpacing Husted in donations. Joe Mas, can Sherrod Brown keep up with $80 million in outside money?
I'm glad you mentioned that last part, because I've been judging by the last go-around that we had in these senatorial races. I think the figure was like $430 million or something like that.
The total campaign, yeah.
Total, and I think $350 million of that came from the non-identifiable groups, so that what the campaigns do is actually a fraction of the total. So I think that Brown will certainly keep up with the donations. I don't know what will happen at the national level with respect to support from the Dems nationally, and that will be an indicator as to how well this is doing. Right now, Brown is running, according to 3 out of the 4 polls, I think 1 or 2 percentage points behind. So there is something. Yeah. But at the same time, as with the gubernatorial races, I mean, if we're talking about a referendum on Donald J. Trump, is that at the end of the day?
Are Republicans worried about John Husted, national Republicans, Mark, with this big money?
Nobody wants to take anything for granted. My old friend John Thune, who's our majority leader in the Senate, is going to make sure that we have a Republican Senate at the end of this year. Problem with Sherrod Brown, and he's the fresh new face and the young voice of change who's been running for office since Gerald Ford was president. And I looked at his numbers in 2012, in, for example, Mahoning and Trumbull counties, he won. And then he lost 5 points in 2018, and then he lost them both by 12 points in 2024. He will only win those counties that are as blue as a spoiled toddler.
So why are the National Republicans spending $80 million to help John Husted?
Well, because you can never take a chance when it comes to the Senate. The Democrats have a decent shot at winning back the House. They would have to run the board to take back the Senate. And if the Senate stays in Republican hands, the president can still confirm judges, and no legislation will get through without some bipartisan agreement.
But I remember last time that Brown got elected, that he won the race, he lost in 80 of the 88 counties, but he still won.
So his numbers, for example, in the Valley, the Mahoning Valley, have gone down, 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 because he used to be popular there amongst working class voters.
I don't disagree with you.
And now they look at him as part of the problem.
That particular class of voters, there's no question that they're leaning towards the Republican Party. The question is that overall in the entire state, is he going to be able to squeak through this time? And I think we have a very, very good chance of that once again because of what's happening in Washington and because Husted has been side by side with the president on everything.
So looking at the main messages, Joe, what is Sherrod Brown going to run on? He's you know, if you read his press release, it's all about affordability, gas prices. Yeah. So is that what he's going to run on?
Yeah, I mean, that's his key issue is affordability. And, you know, he has some core groups behind him. If you look at, like, teachers and public employees, they're very grateful to Sherrod Brown because at the very last thing he did when he walked out of that office, in the middle of the night, he passed the Social Security Fairness Act. He had been working on that for a long time with the help of Republicans. I'll say that too. But that was passed, and that made a huge change for a lot of public retirees in this state who can now collect both their Social Security and their pension.
So, Mark, what is John Husted's primary message for why voters should pick him?
He actually, notwithstanding what Joe said, he's not that particularly close to Donald Trump. Ohioans know John Husted. He has been a state representative. He's been Speaker of the House. He's been Secretary of State. He's been lieutenant governor. People know him. It's not as though he's some new person who showed up in Trump world and put his name on the ballot. So John Husted, pretty serious record of accomplishment in Ohio at a time when Ohio was getting more Republican. And so Sherrod Brown's got a really difficult race this year.
What role are the culture issues, social issues going to play in this campaign? And the Sherrod Brown-Bernie Moreno race was all about transgender rights. I mean, are they moved on from that now? Is that going to be as effective? Is there another social issue out there that could play in this race?
I hope so, and not necessarily for the reason that you might think. My concern is that we are, as a nation, spending a lot of time thinking about issues that are relevant to a tiny, tiny percentage of the population. I hope we do talk about the more serious issues. That affordability, that's something that I think Republicans have at waste and all of that. Fine, go ahead and talk about that. But come on now, transgender right, even the immigration thing, trying to paint people in my community as criminals is not right.
Immigrant. That's not your community at all. You're a legal American. Illegal immigrants coming and taking jobs from legal Americans, that's an affordability question. You are an outstanding legal immigrant.
Well,
I wasn't always legal. I arrived here as a refugee, like many of these people have, and the 2 million, not 20 million, 2 million that have terminated the temporary protective status. I am one of those. proudly so.
Cuba has always had refugee strategies ever since Fidel Castro, but the notion of, under Joe Biden, at least 10 billion illegal immigrants coming in and taking American jobs, that is four-square affordability, and it will be an issue this year. And Sherrod Brown's got a terrible record on this.
I'll tell you what, do it that way. Don't do it by accusing us of being criminals.
That's not you, though. You're not. You're an American.
Nor are they. They're not criminals either.
There are others.
Well, everybody who breaks the law to come here is by definition a criminal, and then far too many of them are killing and raping Americans. And every one of those crimes is preventable.
Mark, that is not true, and you know it is not true.
We know the long list of people who've done it, and every one of those crimes is preventable.
Relevant to 11 million people, and you're going to decide me a long list of a dozen people.
Oh, it's
that
far
is not,
more than a dozen.
That is not fair. And it's
every
not fair.
week there's a dozen or more, and every one one of those crimes is preventable because those people shouldn't have been here.
All right, time for sports.
Okay.
We'll go to sports.
Good jackets.
It is rare. Well, I don't know about that. It is rare the Columbus City Council is divided on an issue. Nearly all of its votes are unanimous. That likely will not be the case when it votes on whether to give $25 million to Haslam Sports Group to help attract a new women's pro soccer team to Columbus. The Haslam Sports Group, which owns the Cleveland Browns, says it needs the money to build a training facility. Private investors are contributing $300 million towards the team. And to pay for that $25 million in city payments, the city would enact a 2% tax on all tickets at the home of the Columbus Crew. That's Scott's Miracle Grove Field. At least a couple of city council members are skeptical. Joe Mas, $25 million when it comes to attracting a pro sports team, it's not that much these days.
That's amazing, but you may be right about that. You know, my position on this is that I think you have to spend money to make money. I like the way that the city is going with respect to growth and being able to find jobs and so on. And I think that this contributes to it. Again, I'm a tax and spend Democrat, and I believe that I'm on the side of what City Council is doing here.
Mark, is a 2% tax on the team that might benefit from this new league? Is that the fairest way to do it?
No. If first of all, I played soccer in high school. My kids played soccer. I love soccer. But if there is a market for women's soccer in Columbus, then investors can put up the money. And if there's a market, they'll make a lot of money off ticket sales. But people going to the Crew game want to see the Crew. Charging them to go to a game for tickets or money that might go to fund a team they may never go see suggests government intervention that's not needed to get a good Crew, get a good team here.
But yet, Joe, we have contributed to the Blue Jackets and the Browns and
the Browns,
Reds and the Bengals and the Columbus Crew.
But we shouldn't have to subsidize, right? And if there's a market, there are markets out there who say they can make money on this. If Columbus is one of them, the investors will come.
Yeah, I think the problem is that, you know, they go to the taxpayers, and the taxpayers always end up paying for this. And there are a lot of people who say, hey, I can't even afford to go to the Browns game, or I can't afford to go to this certain game, and yet I'm paying for it. So I think that, you know, it's something that, you know, yes, it's great, and especially women's sports. I love what's happening in women's sports, by the way. I think it's great for little girls to see it. I also think, though, taking McCoy Park, that is a park that is in a hard-hit area of Columbus. And the residents there, they like that green space. They like that park. So I think, you know, there are a lot of questions about how it's being done.
Joe, is there any difference here because it's women's sports? I mean, the city put up a bunch of money to save the Crew, the men's sports pro soccer team, and, of course, the Browns and, you know, the Reds and the Bengals and
No, I think
Guardians.
I think the motivation is more what Joe mentioned, is that there seems to be some impetus, there seems to be some energy behind women's sports. And I think that City Council is viewing this possibility of this team like any other business that might be coming in the area, and then promoting other businesses that would then support the fans.
Okay, let's get to our final off-the-record parting shots. Mark Weaver, you're up first.
I will make a prediction right here on the program. Right after the 4th of July, right after our birthday, Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito will announce his retirement. And Majority Leader John Thune will then quickly move through a new justice in the Supreme Court for the first Monday in October.
He goes before Clarence Thomas.
I do. I think that.
All right, Joe.
Wow, I'll keep an eye on that. Spring membership drive. Let me say here, don't spoil your kids. I'm almost thinking as an attorney. Go talk to your attorney, change your will, redirect some of the money that you otherwise are going to give to the little brats and make it bequest to WOSU.
Look at that.
Did
All right.
you pay him?
Invite him
he
back.
always-
I do that
Invite him
every,
back.
I do that every quarter.
Joe is a big supporter, and he always helps us out during the draft.
And bequest.
All right. And Joe.
Well, I'd like to say that, that we've seen that the flags are half staff. I want to explain why. Helen Rankin, who was the first woman, African-American woman to serve in the Ohio House, she's passed away. The flags are at half staff to honor her. And I think it's important that we say that, that's a big achievement to have her there, and condolences to her friends and family.
All right. Mayor Ginther says he wants Columbus to be the women's sports capital of the country. I think it's going to be hard to do without a WNBA team, a pro basketball team. Right now, Cleveland has the inside track on that, so maybe Columbus can steal that team from Cleveland and truly be the capital. Anyway, that is Columbus on the Record for this week. A reminder, check us out on YouTube, the WOSU News YouTube page. There you can see and share every episode of this program. Go to YouTube and search for WOSU News. And don't forget, you can also watch us on demand at WOSU.org and the PBS app. For our crew and our panel, I'm Mike Thompson. Have a good week.